This episode of UK Low Carb Podcast is sponsored by Deliciously Guilt-Free. Enjoy the show.
Hi, Jen.
Hi.
Hi, thank you for joining me today. Now, I first met you in Real Food Rocks last July 2019, and I think that was the first time that I really got a sense of how big the keto community and the low carb community can be in the UK. Just before I go into that, I just want to say, if you want to follow Jen or connect with her in any way, she's on Twitter at Jen_Unwin, JEN_UNWIN. And she's currently recording a new podcast, which is very exciting. So we want to find out a bit more about that. And she herself is a clinical health psychologist. So we've got lots to talk about. But before we go into any of that stuff, I just want to talk about Real Food Rocks, because firstly, some people might not be aware of this. And it is, of course, coming up this summer again. So how did it come about, and what was your plan for it?
How did it come about? So I don't know if people know, but obviously David Unwin is my husband, Low Carb GP on Twitter. He's got the biggest Twitter following of almost anyone I know. And we've been collaborating on a project in his practice for the last 7 years with patients. He was having a sort of career crisis, and we decided it'd be quite nice to collaborate on a project. So for one reason, it depends how much detail you want to go into, but we thought that actually a really good project to collaborate on was helping patients with type 2 diabetes with a low carbohydrate diet to reverse their condition. And back in the day, nobody was doing that. It was a little bit, we were sort of surprised how controversial it turned out to be. But we were sort of the first, perhaps sort of medical people doing that in the UK. And we've been keeping data for 7 years, and we go all over the world speaking about it, etc. So it turned into the most amazing and kind of hopeful and sort of energizing project, because people were sort of getting better. So obviously we got into the low carb keto community, went connected with people, set up with Sam Feltham, who's the director of the PHC.
And I think he's organising next. He's organising next Real Food Rocks, isn't he?
Exactly, yeah. So the Public Health Collaboration, which is a charity which is to promote the health benefits of a real food lifestyle, essentially ends up being low carbohydrate, because it's just that the evidence is there for that. So so that had all gone on. So I knew lots of people in the community. I was aware, I don't know if you ever came across Keto Fest in the States,
is this where a whole town effectively becomes keto only for a few days or something? Is that right?
They get taken over and all the keto community come, and there's music and food. And I just thought, well, wouldn't that be amazing? And in my professional life, I'd organised a few sort of boring conferences. Well, they're not boring, but professional conferences. Quite like organising things. So I said to Sam, why don't we have a sort of, what should we call it? Real Food Rocks, because PHC is all about real food, and then we could have music and food and try and get the community together. And we found the venue up in Ambleside, and the rest, as they say, is history. And it was great. It was really successful first year. Unfortunately, the venue didn't have the dates we wanted up in the lakes again. And anyway, the Southerners had been complaining.
Oh, tell me about it. The amount of people
we'd been up in the north.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They said, it's too far from me. I was like, well, I'm actually further away from it than you are, but I recommend it still.
Exactly. So Sam found a beautiful venue in Oxfordshire. So we'll be coming down.
You know that I'm in Cambridge. That doesn't go down too well around these parts. So never mind. We can't go.
So we'll be there. David's speaking, I think. There'll be all the usual crowds. I mean, it was great. It was great last year.
It was really good fun. And the thing I liked about it was, I've been to conferences before where there's a lot of scientists, doctors, professionals in different fields, very much talking about the academic side of the diet, which is really interesting as well. But to go somewhere where there's live music and people are relaxing and not even necessarily talking about low carb, but they are just eating low carb and being really comfortable with each other. And I thought that was lovely. The fact it's called Real Food Rocks, I think, a depressing reflection of our society, that most food we have is processed and not real food. So hopefully one day it will become the norm that this will just be real food, and we'll all eat that way. But I thought it was brilliant and well organized. So
I think well, certainly when we first started, it is still pretty countercultural, isn't it, to eat this way, to live this way, and everywhere we're, as you say, bombarded with processed food and people eating that way. So it's nice to get together with the community and feel sort of a bit normal. It's like everyone around you is also doing that. It's that's a really nice
well
thing.
Besma and I had the same conversation a few times where I naturally just look at some things and think, well, I can't eat that, and just, it's just like a mindset thing, isn't it? You turn it off in your mind. But then I think there was it was an ice cream van or something, and there was also other food vans that I looked at, and I naturally thought, oh, I can't have that, it's bread or it's a wrap. Oh, hang on, I'm at Real Food Rocks, I can eat it. What? And that was a real mindset thing for me. That's such a weird feeling when you're used to saying no, then suddenly thinking you can.
Or having to check, having to kind of read every label or speak to every person, the restaurant, to say, well, don't bring me the bread with it or whatever it is.
They don't look back at you like you're a strange person, they're just like, yeah, that's fine, I do this too. So so I just want to ask you then a bit more about your career, because I don't honestly know what a clinical health psychologist does. I mean, how does that work? What's your profession?
Yeah, well, so you wouldn't be alone in that. I think there's a lot of confusion about the difference between psychology and psychiatry and what the training is and so on. So a clinical psychologist has got a degree in psychology, so a bachelor's degree in psychology, 3 years. We usually have at least 2 years. These days it's that was sort of back in my day. These years it might be 3 or 4 years of experience, usually working in the NHS in a psychology department as an assistant, like that, and then a 3-year doctorate in clinical psychology, which is basically training you to be able to work with people of all ages and backgrounds, so children, older people with learning disabilities, with any kind of mental health challenges. So and then I went on for, then there's sort of further specializations that you can do, and I went on further to specialize because I'd always been interested in health. So I worked with people with various health conditions over my career, from sort of chronic conditions like diabetes, lung diseases, chronic pain, fibromyalgia, those kinds of conditions, helping people who were really struggling. Some people cope really well with these conditions, don't they? And some people really struggle, to the extent that in a way the mental health and emotional impact of having that condition is then further impacting on their ability to manage the condition. Say diabetes, for example, you can see where if somebody was really struggling to accept and manage the diagnosis, it's all about the sort of behavior and the emotions involved, then that could further impact on their condition. And obviously chronic pain is an incredibly burdensome condition to have, and somebody's mental state can make an immense difference to how they cope and adjust with life, really, with that condition. So so that's what I specialized in, and that was how I ended up, in the end, David and I ended up collaborating, because doctors don't know anything about group work, for example. Whereas I've always really seen the value of that, and the difference that can make. So we were just talking about how lovely it was to meet up with sort of like-minded people. And when you suffer from a condition that's lifelong, that might be stigmatized, that restricts your ability to even sort of get out and about, to be able to put somebody in a group of other people who have that same challenge, and to see that work is really powerful. So so I went in as the sort of almost like group work and sort of motivation expert, if you like, and David comes in with his physiology, and it's like a kind of dream team, because if you can help people to get in the right mind space to make those changes, then it starts snowballing, and everybody's in a group encouraging each other. So it's like some kind of marvelous alchemy that goes on.
What I just kind of think, though, that the low carb diet 10 years ago probably would have struggled a bit more, because we couldn't connect with each other as easily, could we? So, in your practice, I can see how you can easily get people together because they're in the same postcodes and they're nearby, and you can organize it geographically. But I think, if I was doing low carb 10, 20 years ago, in East Anglia somewhere, where I am now, there must be only a handful of us doing it, and so we wouldn't even know about each other, and so you'd be a bit alone. And actually, I'm just going to raise a question or a point that was raised by somebody in a previous podcast we recorded, where she said she makes meals for her husband, that the husband has a complete disregard for low carb, thinks it's dangerous for her health. They have, as she described it, that conversation every meal time, and she feels really isolated. And I thought, well, that's why we have, hopefully this podcast helps in this, but the community of people to connect with on Facebook and different groups online, you can reach out if you don't have people nearby. And then what we've done locally, we have a meetup, okay, not as regularly as we'd like. There's only a handful of us who go to it, but it is a feeling of, in fact, we have people travel from quite far to go to it. And we get just to talk and share meal ideas and help each other and encourage each other, which is so important. So
really important. I'll just mention mention the work of somebody that I've come across recently, because we might talk about it later. But I've got interested in sugar addiction lately, and there's a marvelous person called Joan Ifland who's done a lot of research in that area, and she has a program, and she talks about mirror neurons. So she says, as human beings, obviously this in a tribe, it worked really well if we kind of conformed, or we kind of did what other people did. We kind of didn't question it. We just did it.
Yeah.
So this obviously relates to this way of eating, because in the culture that we're in, we're trying to do something that's countercultural, and our mirror neurons are kind of triggered when we see people eating pizza. You start thinking, well, maybe normal pizza. Maybe I'll have a normal pizza. So she talks about that. She talks about as much as possible mixing with people, trying to connect with people that are doing the same thing. And then our mirror neurons, just, if you see other people doing that, you think, oh, that's what we do here, and you don't even have to almost work at it. It becomes something that your brain thinks is normal. So I'm sorry for the lady whose family haven't got on board, because that is more difficult. So over time, what happened with us was I did it first, actually, because I was the first to go, and then David kind of got convinced by it slowly over time. And then over time, the whole family have seen the benefits, and even the teenagers did it in the end. And they've kind of all left home now, but when they come back, they're quite happy. They're coming around tonight for roast duck with
nice.
cauliflower cheese, and I make my cheese sauce just with cream and grated cheese,
which is perfect. Why would you want to dilute it with flour?
Why would you want to dilute it? And the grandkids, we've got 8, 6, 4, and 1 ages.
Right.
Yeah. They all eat what we eat. So
fantastic. That's amazing.
That's been really nice over time. Yeah.
So how do you change the mindset of somebody? You talked about the group therapy side of things, and obviously mindset is essential to how we live our life. It's essential how we fit into society. With regards to food, how do you change that mindset?
So we've kind of got a dual-pronged approach, really. So we tend to go in first with the psychology, and I'm always start with the person's sort of goals, or what better would be, what better would look like, what their hopes are. This is where all the kind of hope stuff comes in that I'm really passionate about. And so we'd always ask a patient, if in 6 months' time this kind of works out, what would you really be hoping for? And they might say something like, well, I want to lose 4 stone, or I'd like to get in this size 12, or they'll come up with something sort of a sort of concrete goal like that. And then the next challenge is to really connect them to the emotional side of that, or why that, what difference would that make? So we always ask, well, what difference would that make, if you lost 4 stone? And usually what people come up with is some sort of it's often to do with families, actually. They'll often say, well, I want to play football with my grandson, or I want to travel. My wife and I have always wanted to travel when we retired, and I just don't feel confident doing that at this weight. Or they'll come up with something that they personally connect to that has some sort of a powerful
interesting
pull, if you like. So then we'd explore that and really get a lot of detail around that. So always start with, what does the future look like? That lighthouse that's going to, in times of temptation, or when willpower's waning, you're aiming for. And then we remember that, and we talk to them about it, and so on. So that's the first step, is to get somebody's goals. And then the other thing is that people often feel really demoralized. They've tried everything, you know, by the time they've got to the GP and their blood sugars are out of control, they've probably tried a number of diets. They've tried to control the blood sugars. They haven't succeeded. That's undermined their confidence, and you know, they're just kind of thinking, well, you know, why bother? So trying to get at, you know, what their strengths are, what resources are around. Like you were saying, you know, can they connect with someone on Facebook? Is someone else in the family willing to do it?
Yeah.
Have they always been a determined person? So really kind of getting the sort of their confidence and pointing out all the stuff that's kind of on their side and what's already working. You quite often find that people have actually already lost a bit of weight, or they once lost 3 stone with Weight Watchers. So you know that they can do it.
Yeah, they can do it. Yeah. Mind you, the failure feeling of, you know, putting the weight back on must be pretty awful.
Put it back on, yeah.
Yeah.
Do they already walk the dog twice a day? You know, people don't start from zero.
Yes.
Do they go to the gym? Do they take their lunch to work instead of eating the chips in the canteen? You know, there's always something that's already so building on what's already kind of going well. And then always focusing then on little bits of progress. So what have they noticed? You know, maybe they've done a couple of weeks low carb, they've had a go. What have they noticed? Do they feel better? They're more energetic, you know, are they sleeping better? Just drawing those things out and pointing them out, asking, oh, what did you notice? You know, well, has anyone in the family commented that, you know, noticed anything? And always sort of shining light on that. And then I don't know if you follow David on Twitter, but he's famous for his graphs.
Yes, I've seen these.
Graph
They're very
of the
good.
week.
Yeah.
And the patients love the graphs. So it's another way of encouraging people along the way, because they're getting this feedback and they're so proud of these graphs, you know, and they go and stick them on the fridge at home, and the family can see that it's, because family are sometimes skeptical, like you're saying, that lady's husband, you know, what they're kind of everything that they've heard for the last 30 years has been about low fat and high carb, basically. So sometimes the families are like, you know, isn't this diet going to kill you? So if they can see somebody losing weight or their blood sugars coming down, you know, what's not to like?
It's proof in the pudding, isn't it?
Proof in the pudding. So those are the sort of motivational sides. And then obviously David's coming in with, he's got some really nice ways now of explaining the physiology to people. You know, why is insulin important? What is it actually doing in your body? I
love that because, okay, so when I went to a conference in California about low carb, I remember being a little bit knocked sideways by the science and thinking, okay, I'm going to have to do some Googling here, some serious Googling to work out what's going on. But the way that he describes, for instance, to see how sugary you are, and I thought, perfect. That's such a clever, because it's so simple way of describing it. Why make it complicated for us who are just lay people? We're not doctors. We just need to know those basic things. And I find it really interesting, actually, how most people don't really understand how their body works. And I didn't know, so I'm not criticizing anybody because I didn't know either. Yeah. When you do start to learn about the hormonal changes, and then someone like, you know, David describes things in such a simplistic, straightforward way, it starts making a lot of sense. And I felt empowered from that. And I felt, in fact, I was going to say this, there's 2 words that go together. So hope's really important. But I think without agency, hope is redundant. You have to have a sense of agency that you have you're empowered to make change. And I think knowledge and the goals, and then, you know, that you actually are in control and you're in the driving seat and you actually have some control over your food. You have some control over your future. That's where hope comes from. If you had no agency, it's very hard to feel hope. So what a lovely sort of combination you have.
Exactly. Hope is sort of, you know, where you want to get to, but exactly as you say, then you've got to know, in a sense, what are the steps to take to get there. Otherwise you're not, hope is those 2 components together, really. It's you know, do you know the steps, and also are you kind of confident you're going to make them? I think the other thing that makes people really hopeful in the practice is that we have the groups, and we've got people now who have had the most amazing transformations, you know, and 1 or 2 people, we had the group on Monday, 1 or 2 people who were there from the beginning, so have been doing it for 7 years and are still maintained, and come in with their kind of fat photos and
let me guess, they don't even
and,
believe that they used to be overweight. I imagine if you saw that person,
yeah.
a bit like Dr. David's
Yes.
first patient who came in saying, I'm off the
Yes.
medication. I bet they must be, you surely don't have a weight problem. I can't believe it,
I know we often say, Chris, tell everybody, how much weight you lost. We've got one amazing lady at the minute. I don't know if you've seen that, but from Saturday, David's in the Daily Mail every day doing his series, and they did a bit of a preview yesterday, and we've got a lady who's lost 9 stone in about a year and a half, and she's got out of a wheelchair. So it's like one of those kind of miracle situations.
How life changing
her
is
life
that?
is utterly transformed her life. And so if she says to other people in the group that she's lost sort of 8-9 stone, it just blows everybody's socks off. And those are people, they live next door, or they're the same age, or that, they totally identify with everybody in the group, like you say, because they're kind of neighbors. So I think that's incredibly. So it's those things all together that come together, I think, to really help people sort of change them. And then, of course, once you start to see progress, your mindset becomes more. You think, right, well, that's it's working.
Yes, yeah.
You become more hopeful, more positive. Keep up that. Try some other things. So it's a process, isn't it? But it is a possible process. But I think it is good to do it in a group. I think that does add an extra.
I think we're social animals, humans, aren't we?
Yes,
I think we need each other. We need to reach out. Even if you're the biggest introvert ever, you still need other people in your life in some capacity. I was going to come to a point you said earlier on, actually. You said about your interest in sugar addiction. And I really want to just find out a bit more, because I've also heard some people describe carb addiction as well. And I must admit, I'm somebody who, if I have a small amount of carbs, in bread form, white flour, I really feel cravings. And it's bizarre. I don't feel that for many other things. I don't feel cravings for steak, although I adore it. I don't feel cravings for cream, but I love that as well. But for a piece of bread, if I have one piece of bread, I can guarantee a few hours later I'm craving it. And the next day I'm thinking, my brain's almost saying, come on, you can have more of this. It's fine. So so
absolutely.
Generally, like what have you found out about?
What's going on? So it's so fascinating, because I'm definitely looking back. I think, or even now, I'm the same. I hardly have ever have anything like that. But actually, a couple of weekends ago, I allowed myself some onion rings which had flour on them, and it actually
I'm tempted already. I'll have to go get some.
Put me out for about a week. So we say sort of food addiction, but actually when you look at the science, it is either sugar or refined carbohydrates. So flour would be the main killer. Which
is, again, sugar in your blood. I've learned that from your husband, of course, that, starch, these sorts of starchy things are glucose in your body, aren't they?
Exactly. So that it just digests, and, it's become those sort of flours have become more and more refined in recent times. And they just turn into sugar. So those things have a specific action in the brain, which steak, protein and fat don't do, which kind of lights up your feel good sort of neurotransmitters. So dopamine, which is the sort of motivation, reward transmitter. So that's why we get those kind of your brain's kind of going, do it again. Go and find some. And serotonin, which is the sort of relaxed, feel good hormone, you get a release of that as well. And of course, in terms of evolutionary survival, this makes complete sense that we were highly motivated to seek out those foods, because those foods helped us to lay down fat in the autumn. So we were highly motivated to find honey.
We had to fatten up to survive.
That's why we thank our ancestors for this darned problem that we have. No, it served us, didn't it, historically? Whereas in the food environment that we live in today, that we've already talked about, unfortunately, it all goes wrong, because that stuff's everywhere all the time. It's not even seasonal. So, but the brain still triggers off those cravings for sugar and carbohydrate, and that's in the very primitive part of the brain. So I was listening to someone the other day who was doing a podcast about sugar addiction, and they said the thing is, you can't think yourself out of it. Once the cravings hit, you kind of, I don't know if you've ever had that experience, Dan, where you've sort of promised yourself you're not going to have a certain thing. No, I've given that up. Or, you know, I'm not having any. And
I'm not going to negotiate with myself, and then
I'm not having it.
And you can actually hear yourself negotiating. Yeah,
there's a line, but then there it is, because someone else has bought it or whatever. I don't know. You've had a drink and you're a bit, and you're literally watching your hand reach.
I have exactly been in that situation, and then the shame afterwards.
Why is my hand doing that when actually the logic? So you can't think yourself out of that because it comes from this sort of very primitive part of the brain, which is to do with reward.
It's instinctual. You are instinctively going for what you need to have.
Yeah, so we shouldn't feel ashamed because we're kind of driven. We're sort of driven by it.
I'm raised Catholic. I can't help it. I just feel shame for everything.
Shame for everything. You can't think yourself out of it. You have to act yourself out of it.
Yes.
And I really like that because that means basically the idea is that you've got to, you don't rely on willpower. You know, we'll say, oh, how do we get more willpower? You can't really, you know, it's a thing that is in short supply, especially you get home from work, you're really tired, you're really hungry. Willpower is gone, isn't it? You've used it all up.
I have a window of the year, actually. Like my willpower time of year is from the 1st of January to about the 6th or 7th of January. And then it's gone really for another year. And then I sort of celebrate the new year again and recover a little bit from New Year's Eve. And it's back for a little brief window.
Exactly.
But I think you're right, actually. I do think patterns are so important in life generally and how we live our life. And I also believe you quite often become your habits. And, you know, and you can make anything into a habit, positive or negative. But I must admit, the longer I'm on low carb, the easier it gets. And that's why I feel really reluctant to give in a little bit. So I went to Kenya to work on a project. And while I was there, we were in an area where the catering was provided for us. We had no choice over our food. And each day I was trying my best to get the low carb option. So I'd just eat, you know, as much fish as I could off the plate or whatever. And one day it was like a really carby lunch of lots of rice. And it was more the social, because I could have fasted through it, but it's more the social element of sitting down with people eating and not eating felt really weird. So I decided to have the carbs. And then lo and behold, about a month later, I thought, why am I doing this still? I'm still eating carbs because I gave in once and it was almost like the green light now. Here we go. We can just give up that wave and go for it. And psychology is everything in this, I think, isn't it?
It is, yeah, and not just as I say psychology, but actual brain chemistry in the sense psychology at that sort of physical level, because
it's who we are, not what we think. It's part of us, isn't it?
Part of us as the way we're sort of designed, sort of humanly, yeah. So it's really that the habit side of it is really important if we can act our way into it. So things like clear out your cupboards, actually. You know, if you're committing to this, don't have it in the house. If it's not in the house, you're not going to eat it. If it's in the house, you're going to eat it. So it's kind of simple. And I think that's another difficulty for families where some people are doing it and some people aren't. You know, it's much easier where you're in a house like who lives in a house like this? No sugar in the cupboards. Apart from I had to buy some recently for the builders. So there is a bag of sugar now in the house, but for a long time there wasn't
scandalous.
Nothing like that.
In the Daily Mail.
Yeah, exactly. Get a photo of the sugar bowl in Dr. Unwin's house. So I think there are some kind of some tricks like that you can help yourself with. You know, work with your psychology.
Yes, yeah.
Don't try and outsmart it, because you're not going to win. You're not going to win.
Got millions of years of evolution behind you, which is leading you a certain way. So work with it. Now, I was going to ask you.
Some people are much more addicted than others. You know, some people can have a little bit, but I think those people who know that they can't tend to graduate to keto and low carb as a way of managing a sort of, you know, either certain struggles with sugar and carbohydrate or you know, really serious, you know, it is serious. You know, people are like in the practice, you know, people are seriously ill because of what they've eaten and, you know, how far it's gone.
And in all seriousness, if you're addicted to no, not at all. If you're addicted to alcohol, you wouldn't just think I can have an occasional whiskey now and again. You just know you don't. And so if it's a real addiction, and I think
Yeah.
it is, then you can't dabble.
Exactly.
I know there's a thing as food addiction as well, which is tricky because of course you have to eat food, but if you're addicted to a particular substance, then you can do something about it and just eliminate it.
Yeah. I think food addiction is actually just sugar addiction, though. I don't think there are many foods
You're so right. I think that's
that are
definitely...
fat and protein based that
Yeah.
solely, that people get addicted to fast food because it's a combination of, usually, like burgers, that you get the bread and the meat. It's not the meat that people are addicted to.
The
It's the
tomato sauce
combination.
is sugary as well.
Sugary,
It's a
and the
bliss point
chips.
as well, isn't it? The bliss point in food is there
Yeah.
to make your brain sing. It wants it. It loves the bliss point.
You can get quite conspiratorial about it, in that a lot of the big food industries, when they saw that tobacco was going the way it was, and that, you know, they'd kind of lost the battle, really. Everybody knew that that tobacco was, you know, bad for you, and game over. They bought a lot of the big food companies, and they knew everything about marketing, because they'd already done it once.
This.
Yeah, so we've been had. So things like they've designed stuff like Doritos, for example, and Pringles. You know, they're designed to be irresistible, as you say.
Yeah, famously dangerously. You can't, when you pop, you can't stop, etc. And I know that's true. I can't help but eat them.
They have that as part of the advertising, because they've made it. So yeah, they've used science against us, really, in that way. So
that's terrible, isn't it? And that's why Real Food Rocks is a good thing, because again, to come back to the beginning, Real Food Rocks is about actual food, not those things which are manufactured in factories and control you. So I just want to come on. We normally end the show with words of wisdom, but before we do, I haven't asked much about the podcast, and I really want to know, because we're in a similar situation. I haven't launched my podcast while listeners are listening to this. I have, but of course at the recording I haven't, and you're in the same situation. So can you tell me a bit more about what the podcast will be about, and ideas for names, and do you know when it might be coming out?
Yeah, so I'm doing it in collaboration with, I don't know if people know diabetes.co.uk, which is the biggest online kind of community for people with diabetes in the world, I think. And they also have a platform called Grow Health, Grow Health, which is about wellbeing in general, not just for patients with diabetes, but for anyone, but sort of using the same kind of knowledge. So it's probably going to be on the Grow Health platform, and we're going to call it Live Well. It's going to be about wellbeing more broadly, but obviously a lot of times it does come back to nutrition things, discussions around nutrition. I'm quite interested in talking to people who've kind of had some sort of an epiphany in their own health and well-being, and they've then gone on to sort of make it their mission to
spread the word,
pass that on, spread the word. So tomorrow I'm talking to Ali Houston, who you might have met, Paleo Canteen.
I'm meeting him next week.
Who transformed his own health, didn't he? And well-being. So Ali's on tomorrow. Of course, I had to interview David, so that was kind of interesting to talk to him. I've had Steve Bennett. Have you come across Steve Bennett?
I don't know Steve Bennett. No.
Have a look at Primal Living, and he's a massively successful businessman who went on.
He's got a podcast, hasn't he?
And he's got a podcast.
Yes, I know. Fat and Furious.
Fat and Furious. He's just on the book.
I know the name now. Sorry, I have heard his show. It's really good.
So
he's like climbed mountains and all sorts, doesn't he?
He's done all kinds of crazy things. He walked to the Antarctic or something.
That's it. I knew his name somewhere.
Yeah. So he's been on. I'm trying to think who else now. Oh, Bridget Hamilton. I don't know if you come across her. She had, again, her own journey with kind of weight issues, and is now a hypnotherapist, helping people with cravings. And so she talks about that.
I need to talk to her. That'd be
she
really
does
useful.
online. She does
Brilliant.
online treatment. Yeah, Bridget Hamilton, and so it's interesting. It's interesting.
Great. Well, good luck with all the recording, and I know what it's like trying to get the backlog sorted out. So
yes,
brilliant. So we're just going to end the show before we get to the questions to talk about some words of wisdom. What advice do you have? And I don't know where you even start, because you know so much. So just in a simple way, what would really make a difference to somebody who's either starting this way of life, or maybe has a mindset that they would like to change, or perhaps they're having the cravings and whatever it might be?
Yeah.
What words of wisdom do you have, Jen?
Yeah. So starting out, I mean, I definitely would think about, how you want your life to be, you know, where is it you're trying to get to, because then that is your sort of guiding light. And then definitely, as we've been saying, connect with people either through Facebook groups, or, you know, if you can find local groups or online. You know, if you've got diabetes, you can do the low carb program online, and that gets fantastic results. And within that is the coaching and the social support as well. So, you know, that's a way that, and it's NHS approved app now, so you can just do it on your phone. You know, if you're busy mom or something. So yeah, get that support, I would say. And then, you know, I just think what we've talked about, which is don't beat yourself up. We would, you know, it's evolution. We were kind of designed this way. The food environment's crazy. Clear out your cupboards.
Yeah.
Don't go down those aisles. Just don't. You know, I hardly ever shop in those big supermarkets now. I try and just go to the butchers. You know, I know everybody hasn't got time for that, but, you know, maybe shop online. You're going to be cued by, in the early days, you're really cued by seeing seeing people eat stuff.
The environment is so important, isn't it?
It's so key. It's so key.
Get your habitat, a keto habitat.
Try and get your habitat straight, definitely at home. And if you fall off the wagon, don't beat yourself up. Get back on. It is the right thing to do. It's definitely the right thing to do. So, as Einstein said, you learn to ride a bicycle by falling off. So, you know, you've got to wobble. So it doesn't matter if you wobble, just get back up. It's human nature. What would you do differently next time? How would you go forward? So
excellent. And actually, yeah, you're so right. I suppose we're human. We're not perfect, and you know, it's about giving yourself a break and then doing it again, getting on with it. I love.
Doesn't mean it's the wrong program. It's just that you've had a wobble for whatever reason. You know.
Yeah. And your past does not have to dictate your future, does it? You know, that's the thing. You can, you are in charge of what you do next, and what happened in the past, let go, but move on. So in that case, we have some questions. And if anyone wants to write in with, well, these are comments. If you want to write in with a comment, a question, whatever, then my email address is dan@uklowcarb.com, on Instagram, uklowcarbpod. And we've got some different comments here. It's really exciting now that this is taking off and that people are, you know, writing in and sharing their thoughts. Now, the first one I'll share is from Nicola Howard, of course, famous from her group, Facebook group, the Low Carb in the UK. And I posed a question earlier on in that group saying, I was talking to yourself about mindset and what do people think? And she said, mindset is, I would argue, the most important thing. If you're still in the mindset that carbs are a treat, they're comfort, or they're about love, then you'll resent not eating them. And going back to your fluffy comfort and ill health will bring you, will 100% happen. Hands down, no arguments. Changing what is on our plate is easy. Changing how we think about food, that's where the work is. That kind of sums up a lot of what you just said.
A lot we were talking about. Yeah, totally. Actually, yeah. In a way, following. See, she's right. Yeah, you know, you can choose to put something low carb on your plate, but it's accepting that is, you know, for you, that's the right thing. You know, it's going to get you where you want to go, and it isn't, you know, a 4-month thing. You know, you're not just doing it to lose a stone. You're doing it to be healthy and to be your best self. And that requires, I mean, certainly, obviously, even more importantly for people with diabetes, but that requires that you find a way to make that your life.
Yes. Yeah.
And to break up with that toxic relationship with sugar that we've all had.
We've all had exes like that. This needs to become an ex.
Just needs to, don't be coming back, knocking at the door on a Friday at midnight.
Get out of it.
Get out of here.
The thing I actually like, because of course I know Nicola from that group, is she's so warm and she's so human and honest. And I think that comment sums up exactly how she is. You know, it's like, this thing happens, change your mindset. But again, I know what she's like. If it does go wrong, forgive yourself, move on.
Yes.
That's important. Now, there's another comment, I think, from Lynn, which I think you have there. So what does Lynn say?
Yeah. Lynn says, I think it's the most important thing, but the most difficult. You're constantly fighting your head to choose the right food and not the wrong. Even though you might normally never choose, say, ice cream, you see a post for low carb types and your mind begins to think how nice that would be. If your mind's not into it, you will not succeed, and finding that willpower is major. So that's absolutely, as we were saying, it's kind of mirror neurons again on cueing. So you see ice cream, and even though it is keto, like, you know, you might think, right, I need to make myself some keto ice cream. Then you make yourself a liter of keto ice cream and eat a lot. So it can be really difficult for those with a, you know, proper hardcore sugar addiction. Things that are like desserts tend to be quite triggering.
And also, because it's low carb, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's zero carb, does it? That's the other thing. You know, you've got to be very careful that you don't go well over into just a normal carb intake because you're eating such large quantities of it. I guess that's always as well, isn't it?
Yes, if your goal is weight loss, that can definitely sabotage you. And sweeteners certainly for proper sugar addicts can trigger you back in, you know, obviously because it's keeping that kind of sweet thing going. And she says it's finding the willpower that's major. So that's the only bit I'd question, really, Lynn, wasn't it? I would say, don't keep looking for willpower. You know, just, you can't think your way out of it. You have to act your way out of it.
Yeah.
So organize your environment, prep your food, get with people who are doing the same thing, get that whole habit and lifestyle thing going, rather than willpower isn't our friend, really. It fatigues.
Yes. Yeah.
It runs out.
Yeah, and it does, and that's the thing. Then you suddenly find yourself eating and feeling the shame again, and that's, you know, it shouldn't be that way. Get rid of the packet in the cupboard in the first place. Now we've got a last point which was sent in. So previously, although of course this episode as well, we've discussed sugar addiction, and I posted in a Facebook group about, you know, do you think sugar is addictive? And Jenny's written this more recently, so I'll include it today. In fact, she doesn't say this; she shouts it in capitals. She says, "Definitely." So sugar, according to Jenny, is addictive. And I completely agree, Jenny. And I think we've covered that pretty well today. So
yeah, it definitely is. The next battle now is getting, so the sugar addiction isn't officially recognized as a scientific category of addiction. Like, you know, now gambling is recognized. Obviously, all the substances, and drugs of abuse and alcohol, obviously all recognized as addictions, even if there isn't a substance, as in gambling, that's recognized as a kind of process addiction. So the next big fight really is to get processed food addiction, sugar addiction, recognized as an actual disorder in a sense, so that there's going to be more funding for research, there's going to be more funding for treatment programs, because there's a real lack of good quality research and treatment evaluation because of that, because the scientific community, some of them who are probably funded by big food, say it's not a thing. So
okay. I was
but we all know it is.
There could be certain interests involved there, couldn't there?
Yeah. But there's plenty of evidence, and if people want to kind of know more about that, Joan Ifland is a good person to follow. Joan, Ifland. Joan Ifland's got all the a fantastic book on all the evidence for that. I'm running with someone called Bitten Johnson, who I'm training with at the minute, who's Swedish. We're running a 4-day intensive straight after the PHC conference in Bristol for people with sugar addiction, a 4-day intensive recovery event.
Oh, wow. Brilliant.
So,
really? That's amazing. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
And it's been a real pleasure talking to you today. Thank you.
And to you, Dan.
Good luck with everything with the podcast. I look forward to listening to it when it comes out. And I'm sure we'll see you around very soon in some other form, either on Facebook or a conference near here or whatever. So, and thank you, and take care. Have a lovely day.
Thanks very much. Bye now.
Bye.